All right, guys, welcome back here to the Flow Innovation Masterclass. Again, our acknowledgements, Dr. Lynette Holder, CEO of Barbados Small Business Association. Lisa Esty, we had her earlier, Senior Manager, Cable and Wireless. Professor Justin Robinson, Pro Vice Chancellor, Board for Undergraduate Studies, University of the West Indies. Also, we have Damien Maskell, B2B Marketing Manager, Trinidad, Barbados, and South Caribbean. Andrea Taylor, Director, Member Services, Barbados Small Business Association. Of course, we have those from the board of the Small Business Association here with us this afternoon. We had a very insightful morning. Hope you guys made your notes, learn a few new things. Remember, guys, technology is your friend, and of course Flow Business is here to help with that. All right, so moving on here, I'd like to introduce our speaker and moderator, Dr. Lynette Holder, CEO of the Barbados Small Business Association. Now, Dr. Lynette Holder has over 25 years experience as an administrator in the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector at the local and regional levels. Now, as for 2 decades, owned and managed a management consultancy firm, catering to both private and public sector organizations here in Barbados and the sub-region of the organization of Eastern Caribbean states. She also served as an advisor and development practitioner in several civil society, financial, and export development institutions. Dr. Holder holds postgraduate qualifications in business administration, regional integration, and other areas of academic study. She is an accredited director and member of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada and a member of the Chartered Management Institute in the UK. And of course, Professor Justin Robinson, professor of corporate finance. Justin Robinson, a professor of corporate finance, is a national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and currently serves as Pro Vice Chancellor, Board for Undergraduate Studies at the University of the West Indies, responsible for academic quality assurance across UE. He obtained his PhD in finance from the University of Manchester in the UK. He also holds MSc in finance and econometrics, from Florida International University and BSc in Management Studies, first class honors from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Barbados. Professor Robinson's research interests are capital markets in developing countries, public finance, financial risk management, and corporate finance in developing countries. Professor Robinson currently serves as a director of the Central Bank of Barbados, JMMB International, Wabisco, and first vice president of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the stage, Dr. Lynette Holder and Professor Justin Robinson.
So I'm going to start with this slide, and this is a slide I've been sharing ad nauseum. And anybody who's heard me speak would, because in my view, this is the problem that dominates my life as an academic at this time that I spend a lot of time thinking about. So this is a data set which shows the growth in GDP adjusted for inflation between 1980 and 1922. And it's very simple arithmetic. All I've done is for all these countries, over that 40-year period, I've just added up all the GDP growth. You have some up years and some down years. And I think a very stark picture emerges for us in the Caribbean and particularly in Barbados. So if you look at Singapore in that same period of time, what's the total growth in the economy? It's like 248%. So the economy, in real terms, you adjust for inflation, is 2.5 times bigger than it was in 1980. And in that 41-year period, they only had 4 years of negative GDP growth and 37 years of positive. I was really a little sad when the numbers turned out this way because kind of the bottom of the class is Barbados, just to go to the extreme, that in that period, the cumulative growth is 22%. 26 of those years with positive GDP growth, 15 are recession years. And that is what I see as the wealth problem, that essentially we have not been able to grow the economic pie. And what we end up really doing is fighting for slices of essentially the same pie. And that is what I define. I mean, if you bring it in our region, the Dom Rep, 180% growth in that period. Mauritius, very interesting place. I say, well, Dom Rep is a big place, relatively. But Mauritius is a very interesting place. I mean, Mauritius is identical to Caribbean countries, except that it's in a different geographic location. It's a small island, former colony of France and the UK, mainly sugar, then transitioned to tourism. They have managed 171% growth in that period. So I see this as the wealth problem. Now, I didn't really want to bore you on a Friday evening with too many slides and data, but if you drill down on the Barbados data, and that's a slide I tend to reserve more for government people to try to really frighten them into thinking. But between 1961 and 2022, the Barbados economy would have increased by about 105%, the cumulative growth. But what is shocking about that number is when you drill down, 3/4 of that growth had occurred by 1973. You find that believable? So we transitioned from a villages sugar economy to a modern tourism economy built out. But since about 1974, 1975, we've been fighting crises. It's almost like the Serenader thing, 2 steps forward, 2 backward, and tremble if you're into that kind of thing. So that's what I define as the growth problem. We are sort of stuck. Now, economists call this a middle income trap, and it's something that happens. An economy moves out from a low income, you get to a middle income, and you can't go any further. I sort of think of it more, I think of it more in football terms. I had aspirations as a younger man. It didn't quite work out, so I figured I had to stick to the books. But it's like if you get to the premiership, you get into the premiership, but you can't challenge for a top 10 position. You're always there just above the relegation zone, but you can't get into the top 10. So I see that as really the big problem of our age, and particularly for Bob. So in many ways, Bob is a success story, and I don't want us to be negative, but we have gotten to this point, but we are unable to move to the next level, to have sustainable growth, to have a growing pie, so that we're just not stabbing and killing and fighting each other for a bigger share of essentially what has been a stagnant pie for almost 2 generations. And that there are a lot of reasons that are given, and I'm not going to try to write any of these out of the story. I think they're all important. Small size. I think we're very vulnerable to external shocks. And everybody kind of knows that. We always grow up hearing if the U.S. catches a cold, we get pneumonia, natural disasters. There's a horrible socioeconomic historical legacy. These islands were never meant to be societies generating prosperity for us. It's an extractive model of colonialism, as distinct from what people call a settlement model, where the Europeans went and settled and lived in New Zealand, Australia, the United States, and Canada. That was a settlement model of colonialism. They went there and they tried to build a society for them. Ours was a settlement, where the country is basically a factory that you extract wealth and ship it back. So again, there's that horrible thing. Again, weak geopolitical importance. We're not really important to anybody anymore. There was a time when you had the Cold War and people would want us, but we're not that important. High debt and all of these. And I think these are all important. And maybe that kind of leads into what I think is sort of one of my points I kind of want to leave. Simple point, and I want to talk about it because I sort of think that one of our problems with getting out of that middle income trap and why we are stuck is that we are caught very much at the level of macroeconomic thinking. We always discuss our problems and our challenges in terms of macroeconomic issues. And I think Caribbean governments tend to focus a lot on macroeconomic stability. Now, when you don't have macroeconomic stability, it's a terrible thing. I mean, and we experienced that in Barbados in some periods between 2008 and 18. We saw when you lose that macro stability, it is very troubling. It doesn't enable growth. But macroeconomic stability is necessary, but far from sufficient. And I think one of our real challenges and issues is how do we move our effort, our thinking to focusing more on, like the audience in here, what is happening in the microeconomy? Because I think that is critical for sustainable growth. I think part of the reason we are so stuck is governments are very focused on macro stability and trying to drive growth really through a lot of capital works projects. And you can grow the economy that way, and we've had growth spurts coming from building out new hotel plant, road works, and right now the government clearly is going down that familiar path, and I think it's useful. It's better to have it than not have it. But the issue is these projects always come to an end. You know, these things have a finite life. Is there some sort of momentum that keeps the economy growing outside of some big construction building program? Because one of the things we know about these construction and capital-led growth is the projects come to an end. And what happens when they come to an end? We then have a stalling and so on. So again, innovation, and we're going to get out of the economic things fast. So there's a lot of, economists are not a tribe who agree on anything, okay? Economists, but there's a broad consensus that growth is really driven by something we call total factor productivity. So you have land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. And the wealth of a country, ultimately, growth is how productively are you using those resources. So productivity is the ultimate driver of wealth. So you can have savings, that's macro, you have investment, capital works, but they are not on their own. Again, they are necessary, but they are not sufficient. Again, there's a clear body of work built up over decades which showing that innovation is critical to having ongoing productivity gains. So innovation is critical. And in a way, the second point is, the first, so I quote there from a study from Rupra in 2014, which shows that, and it's the best known study of total factor productivity, when you combine the productivity of land, labor, capital in the region, that we are significantly below other parts of the world. The region is characterized by low productivity. And importantly, our productivity is significantly lower than other small island states. And I think the second circle there, I think, is that productivity, and I think that's something that we really haven't internalized as a mindset shift, in that firms are important, businesses are important, because that's, in a modern society, we have a society of firms. Organizations dominate modern society. I'm not that old, but I sort of grew up in a small village in St. Vincent where I was born at home. I took a lot of pride in knowing the exact bed I was born on. But I was born at home. I remember when people died, that guys in my village would build the coffin and so on. But nowadays, every aspect of your life is going to happen in an organization. You're going to be born in a hospital. And in fact, nowadays, your parents may have met on a dating site. And your funeral is going to be managed by a funeral home. So we live in an organization society, a society of firms. So productivity is really something that is driven. Productivity and the innovation that is needed is coming at the firm level. And I'm strongly of the view that I don't think our policymakers have really internalized that. We live in a society where the state, where the government looms large, and we sort of expect governments to drive that, and they can't. So I think recognizing the importance of firms and what is happening within firms, how do we empower firms, I think is critical if we are to get out of this start-stop pattern, which I showed you on my first table, which is really leading to a lot of that, what I call the wealth problem. I guess you have to do your definitions as a teacher, so make sure you take your notes. And you kind of have to show that you are learned by giving you a little Latin, So innovation comes from the Latin word innovare. And while there are many definitions, I tend to think of it as the successful exploitation of new ideas. Okay, because ideas are important, but if you can exploit them, if you can turn them into a product that makes, another story, a product that makes somebody some money, that gives somebody some wealth, or that impacts on some aspect of life positively, then, because there are really some innovations that are out there, but have they impacted anybody positively? Again, another thing, I think new products, businesses, processes, and changes that create wealth or social welfare, or actually make the world a better place. And we can sort of think of some categories of, I sort of like to talk about types and categories as a bit separate. So in terms of types of innovation, and I think quite often we limit innovation when we talk about it to talking about technology. And technology is important, it is a sort of dominant source of innovation. But importantly are things like process innovation, just doing some things differently. Business model innovation. You could argue that Google is a technology business model innovation. Google's success, I think, is they have changed the whole business model of how you advertise and how you position a product or how you position something. These are all innovations, and I think it's important, again, for persons in businesses to expand their own definition of innovation. You don't have to find a new technology. I think one of the most innovative and impactful things that ever happened in our region was a positioning or marketing innovation when Sandals offered a sunshine guarantee. And any day on your vacation where there was more than a certain amount of rain, you were entitled to a cashback. So again, that's an innovation, So again, I think people sort of limit themselves in terms of how they are thinking about innovation. But it's a much broader concept. It could be your technology, your processes, how you do things. A simple thing. I have teenage girls. One of the biggest events I saw in Barbados was when one of the secondary schools decided to have their school sports at night. I'm not sure who is worse about this school thing, Barbadians or Jamaicans. It's really extreme in both countries. But again, that's a process. That's a simple tweak. We were going crazy with what happened at Usain Bolt. We were like, but we're going to have a riot here, somebody getting dead or something. It was crazy. And in terms of the categories, and I'm going to start in the middle, innovation could be incremental. It could be small changes. Germany is a very rich place, and Germany is a country where their firms thrive on incremental innovation. They are always trying to build a better mousetrap. I mean, we don't think of a lot of German products, but I'm going to bet you that inside that screen that I'm looking at, there are some inputs and some components that the German companies are just improving slightly how they're done. So again, innovation can be incremental, very small changes. Disruptive tends to capture a lot of the headlines. And one of my latest slides is what I talk about is a tolerance for disruption, and I think that's a big issue for our society. What is our tolerance for disruption, and how we can talk about this? I'm of the view that Amazon would have never succeeded in Barbados because there would have been a massive lobby that it was shutting down bookshops, and we would leave it, and we would close it down. You know, Frandel Stewart was famous for saying that there's no Easter Sunday without Good Friday. Huh? You know, without the crucifixion, there's no resurrection. You know, without that labor, there is no lovely bouncing baby. You know, this innovation, productivity does require sometimes the shedding of blood in a literal sense. It requires disruption. So we talk about the US and their wealth. I mean, one of the most striking facts about the US is that if you look at the Fortune 500, their most valuable 500 companies, every 30 years or so, more than half of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 are no longer in there. So that tolerance for disruption, I think, is one of the issues that we have to probe at a societal level, and our policymakers are very quick to move to stop disruption. Because once you have innovation of a certain type, there are going to be losers and winners. And innovating is hard work. It's much easier to lobby and get a political party or some group on your side to protect you from being disrupted. But our society does not yet seem to have that tolerance for disruption, and really what will come, what must come if you are to have change. And we take these things for granted, huh? How many persons in here work in agriculture? But 100 years ago, virtually everybody on the planet, 90%, was involved in some kind of agricultural labor. We've had to make that massive, massive transition. So disruptive technology, disruptive processes, disruptive business models, these are all critical parts of innovation that you should be thinking about in your firms. And kind of newish, not so newish, what people are talking about is lateral disruption, which is really where a company is taking quite often a business model or a process from another industry and bring it into a different industry. So there's a particular way of doing something in industry A, and somebody adopts it in a different industry. So again, that's a form of innovation. Now I want to talk a little bit as I kind of move to the end of my opening remarks. So the best data at the company level, again, the Compete Caribbean, they have been running this ongoing research project, two data sets that covers about 4,600 companies across the Caribbean. I think there are about 273 Barbadian firms. And this is quite a unique data set because we don't have a lot of company level data in the Caribbean. And I think that's one of the huge problems in terms of making public policy. We have no idea how businesses operate. And I'm sure you as business people have been through that. You listen to a budget And you think, does anybody presenting that budget have the foggiest idea as to how businesses work? How does this translate into business action? And part of it is we don't really have a lot of information about firms and how they operate. So the report card is not great. So the study, one of the things it tried to do was to identify firms that are innovative, that are engaging in one or more of the types of innovation I have defined there. And the numbers are quite low. So Trinidad and Tobago has the highest percentage of innovative firms, and again, only 14.5%. And a lot of people are in for Barbados. We are there and thereabouts at 7.1% of firms that are part of that sample have engaged in some form, one or more of those forms of innovation. What I find interesting is there's a much larger number of what they call potentially innovative firms. They haven't done any innovation, but they would like to, and they are actively pursuing possibilities of engaging in. And so we see a much larger number of firms that are in that potentially innovative. So again, the summary of those findings is the proportion of firms that are innovators is relatively small in our region, much lower than other parts of the world, and importantly, lower than other small island states, and so on. So what did this study find were some of the major determinants of whether companies were innovative or potentially or not? And one of the useful things about the data set is because this research methodology has been applied under the Office of the IDB in a range of countries, we can compare firms in the region to firms in other parts of the world, Europe, Africa, Asia, Latin America, that are of a similar size and features. So size is a factor that impacts whether people are innovative or not. And that's kind of maybe obvious. The larger this firm, the more likely it is to engage in innovation. If it's engaging in export activity, that again is facilitates. If they have an R&D department or some research innovation department. The level of competition is also quite a factor. That the more intense the competition that they play, and that's also linked to, again, if you're exporting. In that sense, innovation becomes almost critical to your survival as a business. Also, whether things like patents are adequately protected. What emerged as some of the major barriers to innovation in our region? Well, one was the cost, the actual level of available financial resources. Innovation is not cheap. It is risky. There's potential for making losses and so on. So the cost, the availability of funding, and that again shows up so much as a critical constraint in our region. Whether or not there's direct public funding for innovation, again, is a major factor. Because again, innovation, as I said, is high risk. You can invest a lot of resources and not be successful. I mean, as an academic, I experienced that. You can spend a whole year or two working on a research paper, and when you submit it to the journal, the people reject it. And then what do you have to show? Okay, so again, when you are doing creative, innovative type of work, there is that risk of failure, and the direct funding, public funding, is a way of mitigating that. Because again, there is funding for your innovation that doesn't endanger the success of your own business. Your ability to get your product to market quickly. The time to market seems to be a major constraint or a barrier to innovation. So if, for example, things are delayed in your port for a long time, or you have a long approval cycle through some government regulatory agency, those types of constraints which really lower your time. And these barriers seem to be more important for potentially innovative firms. It seems like if these firms could overcome these barriers, they would actually be in the innovative rather than potentially innovative. Some other interesting findings is that the proportion of skilled workers increase the likelihood. And I often draw a distinction. Look around, I don't see anybody from university here. So and skill doesn't equal qualification, huh? Because I think that's a mistake we make, and that's something I hear a lot from private sector people. We have a lot of certified people, but we have a lot of qualifications, and we don't have the skills. So it's important to have persons with those skills. The experience of the manager, and again, as related earlier, the burdensome nature of government regulations. And I'm going to go through quickly. I think in terms of government policy in particular, I think there is room. I think government should have a much stronger and more laser-like focus in addressing a number of these barriers, and the cost aspect shows up very, very important. And policy options that increase access to credit and funding to the private sector, I think is the most important thing in driving innovation, which drives productivity, which then again helps us deal with that wealth problem I started with. Again, some specific things. Collateral is a critical part of our lending infrastructure, which often requires fixed assets. Again, legislation that allows the use of other types of assets, I think could be quite important. The ability to use patents, designs, and other forms of intellectual property. The ability to resolve insolvency, I think is quite important. Because again, linked to the disruption argument, innovators, entrepreneurs need to be able to fail and come back again and again and again and again. And our insolvency legislation tends to favor creditors significantly. So your capacity to fail and come again is severely constrained. And I think so again, I'm saying that really that bankruptcy or resolving that, I think is going to be critical. Because again, if you fail, that's it. Then obviously you're going to stay in your box and and don't try anything. So that's a bit obvious. Again, promoting competition within the banking sector. Government credit guarantee support schemes, again, I think are all important in helping managing that. And the new stuff, peer-to-peer lending, crowdfunding, again, all innovative source of financing for innovative firms. And one of the big challenges, access to equity financing. That is a huge issue. I mean, I spent a lot of my career studying that, don't really have an answer to it, but the Caribbean firms have the least access to equity financing anywhere on planet Earth. There is very little equity finance. Because I mean, if you look at any of the government financing schemes, it's a grant, which obviously is going to be limited, or is some form of debt financing. The advantage of equity financing is that you're not locked into repaying a principal and debt on a schedule. If the business is successful, the equity investors do well. If the business fails, they get cleaned out. But equity financing, venture capital, and others, these are the drivers. So again, I think any government financing scheme, the equity financing component is critical. I kind of mentioned this, the tolerance for disruption. I think that's a major issue that, again, small business, I think that's where your lobbying effort and your voice might be. Dukaran, former central bank governor, speaks of an anti-growth alliance in the Caribbean. And he's really speaking to a nexus of certain businesses. It could be trade unions. It could be governments that do very well in that middle income trap I'm talking about. The economy is going 2 steps forward, 2 steps backward, but They do very well in that environment. They are not they have no interest in disrupting that status quo. And they would be foolish too, because again, they do very, very well in the current environment. And Dukaran calls them the anti-growth alliance in the sense that innovation may very well, an entrepreneurial economy, innovation may very well disrupt their privileged, wealthy, stable, easy life, and that they are able to influence the policy framework that we operate within to maintain a status quo that they do very well on. I mean, and I think, in other words, some people argue that Caribbean states are good for some business persons, but not necessarily good for business. Okay, so in other words, Caribbean states and their policies, they are good for some business persons, but they are not necessarily good for business in a broad, general sense, which is what we need to drive that innovation and that entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurial, innovative, post-colonial societies are rare, so the problem is not an easy one. But I think Barbados is in need of economic invigoration to maintain those historical gains and address the emerging challenges and opportunities. I mean, I think we are beginning to face a situation where many people are feeling that the next generation is not going to do as well as the current. I mean, in my relatively new role at UEA, I spend a lot of time in Jamaica, and I think what sums up my wealth problem, was one of my cousins, her daughter just graduated with medicine, and she said, the dean of the med school was telling her, but you all are still going to have to take care of her. Because the opportunity is not there. And I guess my final point there, macroeconomic stability and capital projects, which I think have been the focus of our governments and their policy. That's where they have invested their energy with varying degrees of success. I see these as necessary but not sufficient, that our governments must become, public policy must actively support a national innovation system. I thank you for giving me that bit of your Friday time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am sure that you agree with me that we can stay here for the rest of the afternoon listening to this presentation. And those members of the association, you would have seen some of these slides.
But if we can stay here, you can't only have water.
Well, but that's it. I mean, don't worry. Damien would correct that easily. So members of the association, you would have seen some of these slides when Professor Robinson shared in November last year on what is involved in really making an entrepreneurial economy. And the SBA chairman and I, we've been having this conversation because it really stirred some discomfort in us when we saw the position of Barbados on that first chart, the bottom of the totem pole. And the analysis showed, Professor, that from about 1974, we have really not been growing. And the question that often engages our attention is, but is no one seeing this? Has no one really seen this? But we are today in 2023. So what are we going to do about it? I think it rose up.
I don't want to cross it, but what you're saying there is important, because I was preparing for a seminar when I really ran that data, and I was stunned. I mean, I remember calling Clevy. I said, Clevy, these numbers right? I called Winston Moore. It was like a Sunday morning, and we were like, we should be in church, and we didn't go in church. And we were like, wow.
It wakes you up. At least it did for me when I saw it. And I tell you, I'm a lot more resolute now that we just have to be candid. We have to speak out on issues, and we have to do something. How do we really get this entrepreneurial economy that we're talking about? Because despite, what we're seeing and how we feel, we're really not that entrepreneurial in my view. And I think the data is there to suggest that at a macro level that is. You saw the quote at the end. that the Caribbean may be good for some business people, but it's clearly not good for business because it is not as entrepreneurial as we need it to be. So the floor is open, colleagues. We need to hear from you. We need your input, your contribution. Now, Professor is here to answer your questions and to comment on your thoughts. We're looking at entrepreneurship management in a modern Barbados. What is it that we need to do? We know we have Flow Business ready and available to provide the technology solutions for us. We heard the presentation from Lisa earlier. But we need to maybe go even further in this segment of our masterclass. Yes, ma'am. State your name for the record as the session is being recorded and go ahead with your comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Angela Knight. I have 3 quick questions. Professor Robinson, I don't see you have anything to note them on quickly. You can answer them when you get a chance, not all together. You're going to remember them? Okay. Should. All right, good.
I haven't started my Friday drinking yet. So.
Okay, so you're good. All right, good. So one thing I'll be following on from Dr. Holder is you mentioned our local productivity is lower. So in terms of the regional analysis, so my thing is how comes? Maybe some of the reasons that you could indicate, if you're aware of some of the reasons, if it's lack of efficiency, if it is, if anybody has done a deeper sectoral examination to see if it is in particular sectors that our productivity is lower. So the first question pertains to the lower productivity regionally and maybe why. The second quick one is, if you were the Minister of Commerce, Prime Minister for one day, what would you leave us for growth? You mentioned that we seem to have been struggling with growth since 1970 somebody. What would you leave in place, whether a 5-point plan or a 10-point plan that could help us grow? And finally, I note that today you didn't use the word risk averse. Normally when I listen to presentation online, I know you tend to use the terminology risk averse when it comes to entrepreneurship and everything. So today you didn't use risk averse. So my thing is, if we are risk averse, as I've heard you say in the presentations online, when I take them in from at work, how long do you think we would take to turn that around? Is it 2 generations? Is it that we're really risk averse, or is it that we don't have the finances to really bounce back from any fall? So those are my 3 quick questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks. People who are on campus with you always ask you the hardest questions. It's
Not only that, she seems to be one of those who do shopping at work too.
So I'm going to start with the third one, the risk averse. I deliberately didn't mention it because I'm not as persuaded that the culture is that risk averse. The studies we have done don't suggest that Barbadians are any more risk averse than any people in any part of the world. And anecdotally, when I see the amount of people who are playing lotteries and games of chance, so I'm not persuaded, but in a sense, a large percentage of any culture tends to be what you might call risk averse. Okay, because change is unsettling. You get into your habit and you get into your routine and so on. So I don't see risk aversion as an issue in and of itself. I think the issue is the persons who want to innovate, who want to be entrepreneurial. What are the issues? What are the barriers that are preventing them from actually being able to be successful in that area? Which sort of leads me into your second question, where what would I do? I think for a variety of historical reasons, we started, and I think it was the right thing at that point, with the state being extremely dominant in the economy. A lot of goods and services in Barbados are provided for us almost directly via the state. And that may have been useful at a particular point in time. And I think part of the growth challenge is that, I want to give you that state-led model has probably taken us as far as we can. So one thing I would be very keen to do would be to engage in a process of empowerment, entrepreneurship jumpstart through privatization. So again, a simpler one. The fact that you are paying for garbage collection, you are paying every month on your water bill a fee that goes towards solid waste. So in a sense, you're already paying for it directly out of your pocket. It's not a set of money that is going into the consolidated fund and being used. I would be very keen, if I were in that seat, to really explore how could I create a set of private firms to do this. But I would want to do it in a way that you don't end up just handing out one large contract that an established player is going to get. So I think there is scope for doing that kind of privatization, empowerment, if you take, for want of a better term, an affirmative action approach. And I think there are a range of things that our state is doing that I think if we were to privatize in a manner that sought to empower a range of firms than handing out one or two large contracts, I think that could be a fillip. I mean, I don't see why we couldn't have some medium-sized businesses linked to credit unions or whatever that have contracts to manage solid waste in St. Philip, St. John, and you create some regions of the country. You do a similar thing in terms of public transport. I see so much entrepreneurship in healthcare, for example. I'm of the view that, and I think importantly, in terms of managing the risk, there's no reason why the state doesn't still have to pay that money, you know. So it's not that you have a garbage collection business, a small business, and you run the risk that the homeowners don't pay you when you collect. The state could still pay you. They could still collect that money and still pay the entrepreneurs as a way of managing that particular risk. There's so much entrepreneurship in healthcare delivery in Barbados. I'm still of the view that quite a bit of with careful thought, a lot of what we do in the state sector at QEH and polyclinics could be spun off again to private players who can do this very well. Because right now you pay for, even outside the consolidated fund, since 2018, you've been paying a levy as part of your NIS contributions that goes directly to fund the QEH. Why can't that be you, or fund some kind of health insurance scheme with it then? That persons can then, because if like me, Saturday night, you out with your family and somebody say they don't feel well, where do you want to go to check? You want to go to a polyclinic? Is a polyclinic open? Do you want to go to A&E? But people want to go Sandy Crest, urgent care, FMH. These are things that could be expanded. So I think that's an important part. If I were in the seat in a day, how could we really, a lot of state provision, I think it was useful at a point. It was probably necessary at a point. We didn't have the private capabilities. The other point I think it's a bit of a mindset. I think the state, no, but not even. I think the state needs to step back. You know, we hear a lot about about reforming SOEs. I think governments have been so accustomed to be up in all of these areas, and you know, I really think that's important. But in terms of productivity, now, when we say that people are unproductive, I mean, low productivity isn't really, I mean, I don't want people to take that in a negative sense. Because productivity, we're really saying, okay, are you doing things consistently better? It's not that you are slacking off in that sense. Are you finding newer and better ways to do things faster, cheaper, and that mix? Now, I think the productivity challenge in our region, it really comes from the things I'm putting on the board. I don't think it's any inherent laziness or any factors. There are significant barriers to being an innovative firm in our space. You know, it's a very heavily regulated space. There isn't that tolerance. So I think there are a whole set of factors.
Before Troy poses his question, let's go back to that second point that you made about really creating that entrepreneurial economy by decentralizing, if you will, pulling more and more into the pool. I support that view. And just recently, colleagues, and I really want Barbadians to be aware of this and begin to speak up and speak out on these issues. Recently, there was someone in the press speaking to what they perceive to be this mediocre performance and mediocre service provided by those in the construction sector. And I read the comments and I smiled, because anyone who understands the history of Barbados, and I want you to weigh in on this, Professor, would appreciate that after slavery as a formal institution came to an end, following the emancipation period, that a number of those from the mercantile class were emboldened and given the opportunity to build capacity in business through the state. The state decentralizing a lot of the activities and giving them the ability and the power and so on to develop business. And so what we see today as maybe a lot of the Bajan white in this country who have monopolized certain areas of industry for a while, they were given that opportunity to develop business. So what is the challenge now with us doing something similar with key industries, construction being one of them, to help our small businesses and black businesses in particular build capacity?
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that you use the word that people need to be firm and resilient, because I don't think we want to be naive about capitalism. Nobody gives up advantage. I mean, that's why I came back to this slide. The status quo works very well for certain players. And if I were in their shoes, I may not be doing what I'm doing here. Because people are not suicidal. They're going to act in their own interests. So if you are doing very well from the status quo, why would you change it? What is your incentive to change it? But we have to, so that's why we have, so persons who are outside of that status quo, and persons like us and myself who have a living paid for by the state at the university, supposed to be generating knowledge, I think we have to be true and honest in what we do and put that information in the public domain. But I don't we can be naive about it. No one is going to give up their mountaintop position. You got to take it from them. I mean, that's just the reality. You kind of have to have that confidence, and that will, because once you're an incumbent, and I mean, I kind of change up my lecture, my presentation a little bit, but once you're an incumbent, you adopt a certain mindset. You have a business model to defend. So people talk about like payments. So one thing I had in my original lecture was a lot of innovation in payment systems around the world. You have all of these mobile wallets. So if you go to China, 98% of retail payments in China do not come through a bank-issued instrument. Alipay and WeChat which are two payment platforms which are not financial companies. So Alipay is a payment platform coming out of Alibaba, which is, I guess, China's Amazon. And then WeChat is a payment platform coming out of Tencent, which is their big telecom company. I guess their flow to bring it. And that's where 90-something% of people who shop, retail, we're not talking about big commercial transactions. That's what people are using. People are having their salaries sent to these mobile wallets. Now, what's the attraction for a vendor? For vendors, it's great because the alternative is people are using credit debit cards. On a credit card transaction, there's a 2.5 or something percent. These mobile wallets is less than 0.5%. But if you are a bank, you're not going to encourage that kind of innovation. You have a very highly profitable credit card payment to defend. You have SWIFT, which is their payment. So I don't think we can be naive about this disruption and so on. People are going to defend what they have and defend it to the hilt with whatever tools they have. And we're not going to have an innovative entrepreneurial society until people are willing to go and take what they want. You have to go for it. You have to go and do it. You have to be bold enough. Nobody is going to give it to you. Because even if you see, like what I was talking about, you start giving out small contracts, you know what the big guys are going to do? They're going to set up a series of smaller companies that can qualify. So you kind of have to be prepared for that. Nobody is going to give you an angle or an ease. You got to go out there and got to be willing to go down and dirty and fight for it.
Yeah. Troy?
Hi, good evening. My name is Troy Williams. Your presentation was very touching. You would have gone through a number of points, and some of the outstanding points for me, you said that skill and qualifications are two different things. And for me, I've been in business for over 20 years, from 12 years old. My teachers could attest to that, fully in business, doing it back at 12. I was at the prison, I was at BADC, I was doing a lot of work. And what I can say about entrepreneurship is definitely a passion, is a drive. And it's basically a conversation. I could speak for the rest of the evening, but I know that we don't have that time. And there's some significant things that would have happened. When I came here, there's a person in the room that I had to make a phone call for the last 2 weeks. And I find with entrepreneurship, you really have to confront situations, and it's a conversation in general. So when you speak about financing and stuff, my companies from the outside, everybody will look at my companies and say, well, Troy Williams is doing well. But they don't know the pressure and the stress that you will have to go through. Next thing that I see about entrepreneurship, I've been tasked to work with entrepreneurs, and I recognize that different entrepreneurs have a different passion and capabilities. Because you got like the barbers, the hair salon persons, and different people. Then you have persons like myself and others who are like in the emerging, the construction area, which is about to boom, or one of the key accelerators for the Beijing economy. And there's so much, it's so wide, the opportunity to be an entrepreneur. There's so much things out there to do. And one of the things that I've done for myself is that I've basically taken a step backwards, and I find that you get more done not going. When I go to the office, it's just pure confusion. Like, I left from home and I came straight here. I've not gone into the office. We know that Friday is a busy day. But I think that entrepreneurs really need to be fueled through the same funding. I think mentorship is a big part, because, again, speaking about my situation, I've basically raised to the top, and I've basically taken a sudden fall to come back to a stage that I'm not flat, but I'm comfortable. If you had to take everything away from me, what I own and what I don't own, I can make a comfortable living. But it's the people I have persons working for me for more than 15 years. I have persons that were working for me when I was 14 that still works for me. So the circumstance is that I think that the question where the lady will ask what would you do to improve, but I think is a continuous daily improvement with everyone. Everyone just have to give the inputs and try to improve. But I'm seeing
Wrap up, Troy. Come to the landing for me, please.
right landing. So
Yeah,
I
landing
just want to
plane.
give my part, but based on what he's saying, I think
Yeah,
funding is very important, but not just funding. Where he says the ability to fail and go again, because I believe that progress is a slow process, and I believe that you learn more from your failures than from your successes. And if you're passionate about something, if you fail, you wonder why you fail, and you want to go back at it. So there's a lot to be done in terms of entrepreneurship, and innovation is a very important part. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Well said. All right. I have 7 minutes to 2, and I'm sure that persons are thinking about their lunch. So let's take two more interventions, and then we'll hand over to the MC again to wrap up before persons head out for lunch.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rashina Homer, and I'm currently an econ and accounting student at UE Cave Hill. I just wanted to thank the organizers of this event because it's very fitting, and just last Wednesday at the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business, there was a panel discussion on innovation and investment. We had featured speakers such as Sylvia Donner from the Inter-American Development Bank. And just as you would have done, Professor Robinson, she would have revealed some startling statistics, as we would have heard about Barbados and its low figures in terms of innovation and even potential innovation. So that's why I was also glad that I could sign up for this to come here, because we did mention the different measures we could take in, basically promoting innovation and letting small business owners know the need for innovation in terms of propelling economic growth and so on. I'm not sure how updated the statistics you would have revealed Mr. Robinson would have been from, but when Ms. Donner revealed hers, Barbados was like at the very bottom for potential innovation and innovation at the current moment. So I was glad that this forum, we could actually see it live how it is. I also just wanted to share a few of the tenets or ideas from that session. We
might not have time for that second part of your presentation. So if you have a question, go right ahead. You see the MC is in position,
okay, no
and he's sending me little glances that I need to wrap up. And I think I have another question to come. So if you have a question, go ahead quickly and pose it, and then let's get the lady behind you.
Okay,
because
no
time now is against me.
So my question, or I guess last comment would be, you mentioned policy in terms of government creating a framework, which I agree with, for small business owners to develop. But what would have come out again, that session from last week, was that government can't do it all. It's up to the small business owners within this room and even beyond in Barbados to actually, propel themselves and to get groundbreaking innovation so that you can grow and so on and develop the economy. So that's my last comment.
Very good. Thank you so much. Love the intervention. Yes.
Hi.
Final question? Is there someone else? Okay, so this is the final question then. Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Tamara Gibson. I'm going to skip the pleasantries because we're short on time, but good job, everybody. And I wanted to respond to your question. You posed a question, ma'am. What's your name? Miss, not you. This lady here. On the stage.
Lynette Holder.
Right.
Lynette Holder.
Miss Holder.
Yes.
You asked what could be done for the small business to help businesses that are in Barbados, and I'm going to draw on things that Professor Robinson said in my response to that. So it's not really a question, but I'm happy to have the opportunity for a small business to be able to talk to a development agency about some of the things that we need coming out of it. So one of the things I would say, three things. One of them would be greater facilitation from the business development agencies. Facilitation for things that can really make a difference for small businesses getting towards things like export or moving bigger numbers that would give us a bigger voice, I should say. Professor Robinson, you talk about a macro view, basically for when countries are looking at, for growth and development stuff. As small businesses, I think there's a high percentage of business across the region, not just in Barbados, but most of the businesses are going to be micro businesses. They're not going to be big businesses. And so we're never going to move the kind of numbers that, bring attention to the industries or the sectors that we are in. However, if we had facilitation from the development agencies and for something, for example, like a cluster, let's say that the Small Business Association began to act as like an anchor that was able to secure a lovely soap contract from Indonesia, and they wanted 5 million soaps on a quarterly level or so. There's no one small business person that could do that. But if the Small Business Association got that contract, but then in turn could organize their soap makers within the country to fill said contract against a particular number of standards, organize then even further the inputs that go into the soap making, like all the people know that can grow the herbs and we can turn them into essential oils that can put into these things, lower the cost for the inputs, those types of things. That type of facilitation, I think, is something that could be very beneficial for small businesses. The second point is, that's on the export level, but the second point is the backward linkages. You kind of touched on it, Professor Robinson, with the sewage. Something like that, where the small businesses, the micro businesses, can perform services for the larger businesses within the society instead of, big contract. Correct. And then the final thing was, again, back to the development agencies, facilitation or lobbying at this point, but the doing business index in Barbados is horrible. It's taking us only like 4 months to get a merchant account. 4 months, that's like ridiculous, right? We talked today in this room about e-commerce. I have a full e-commerce platform. I'm gonna clap for me. But it took me 16 months to get that. And for a country that is talking about entrepreneurship, that's ridiculous. 16 months. We just had 2 years having to live online. Why is it taking 16 months to get a contract? I actually got a call from a person who owns the gateway that I'm using to congratulate me for getting it done in under 24 months. And I got it done because I had to tell off some people. I don't want to be that girl. I don't want to be that girl. But facilitation from the development agencies on the things that really affect our businesses growing. Most micro businesses die within 2 years, but they don't die because they can't be profitable. They die because the ecosystem helps to kill them fast. That's my point.
All right, so what we're going to do now is give Professor Robinson an opportunity to share some closing thoughts, and then I will conclude and hand over to the moderator.
Okay, thanks. Again, it's always a pleasure, and for me, as an academic who spends a lot of time thinking about things, to interact with people who actually do things, I always find that quite a useful thing. I don't think there's any shortage of entrepreneurial capacity or innovative capacity in our society. And I think, just to borrow the lady's phrase, I think our ecosystem to support businesses is quite inadequate. I think for a number of reasons, we have a status quo that is friendly to certain businesses, but not businesses in general. So again, 16 months to start an e-commerce site. That's what I meant in the presentation when I say things like time to market. If that's the kind of time you're gonna take to bring your idea or product to market, then it's almost dead on arrival, so there's a big challenge. The government can't do anything, and one of my central arguments is that the government should step back and it can create an entrepreneurial innovation impetus for the society, an injection similar to all these capital projects that a lot of effort and money goes to getting. I think a similar effort could be around, is there a chunk of our economy that we can hand over to our private sector in an empowering manner? I think that's a critical initiative that people need to lobby for. And for the businesses, I often say, you have to look at we talk about pain points and these barriers, but pain points are areas for innovation. The most successful businesses are things that solve for pain points. And I think you want to identify pain points and look to disrupt things that are potentially big. So I've just come back from some time at MIT's Innovation Lab, and all of these kids are trying to write payment apps. But you know why? Because the payment system is 4.5% of US GDP. You only need to get 0.000000001 of that on your app, and you're doing well. So I would say, look for areas, big areas to disrupt. And you think you know these things, but you know what? So like sewage. You know when my eyes opened to sewage in Barbados as a business was when there was a town hall meeting about the Cahill project. Anybody here went to that? If you saw the type of persons who were there, I said, but think about it, all of us generate a lot of waste every day. That has to be managed. So I think there are these areas, and I don't think there's any shortage. I think one of the key initiatives is to keep up the public discourse in terms of the need for the state to, one, have that enabling environment, foster the parts of the ecosystem they can. But I think critically, those parts that it was necessary for the state to be in at and around independence, that they can step away from that and hand it to the private players, but doing it in an empowering manner. Thank you.
Round of applause again for Professor Robinson. And thank you so much, as usual, for sharing your thoughts and perspectives on this subject that we all love. Colleagues, my time is up, but allow me, please, Flo, to plug a little advertisement in there. I want to share with you that all of our presentations, webinars, etc., are on our website, our YouTube channel. Please go on and take a look, watch them, especially the presentation with Professor last November, and go even further back with Pro Vice Chancellor Sir Hilary Beckles as we started some years ago this conversation. Question, what can we do, what should we do, and so on, kind of rhetorical, because we kind of know what we need to do. It is really for us now to get it done, and that's the issue. We need to work together in order to get it done. But I think that we at least are on the right path. The conversation is going on nationally, and I believe that if we continue in this way, we should be able to make a dent in this process. So Flow Business, again, a partner. We look forward to seeing you for Small Business Week 2023. And Sagicor is in the room. We look forward to seeing you as well. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a good audience. And back over to the Master of Ceremonies.